Hello, fellow book lovers, both readers and writers. I am Maddie Dalrymple. I write the Ann Kinnear suspense novels and suspense shorts and the Lizzie Ballard thrillers. And I also write, speak, consult, and podcast on the writing craft and the publishing voyage as the indie author. You can find out more about me and my books at maddiedalrymple.com and at theindieauthor.com. And this is my video series, What I Learned, where I ask authors two questions related to their latest book. What did they learn from that book that they would like to share with their fellow writers? And what did they learn that they would like to share with their fellow readers? And I'm here today with Jane Lee Rankin. Hey, Jane, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
Oh, I'm pleased to have you here. To give our viewers a little bit of background on you, at 37, Jane Lee Rankin receives news that upends her life. She's pregnant. Lee is a cancer survivor, 18 months in remission. Her boyfriend won't commit. Her father is unsupportive. Lee decides to raise the baby alone and, after meeting an alpaca, follows her dream to start an alpaca farm as she raises her son, Will. As a novice farmer, Lee faces nature's most potent setbacks, from disastrous weather to predator attacks. With bravery and persistence, she creates a home, a farm family. Her latest book is Farm Family, a solo mom's memoir of finding home, happiness, and alpacas. Who could not be interested in talking more about that? And so today I'm asking Jane the two What I Learned questions, starting with, what did you learn from Farm Family that you would like to share with your fellow writers?
So I learned a bunch from writing this book. Number one, going back as a memoirist and writing what happened in a series of this happened then and that happened then. I was able to get perspective on what had happened and put pieces together that I had never put together before. For instance, when I started writing the book, I would not have said that the day I left to come to North Carolina for a book signing, just happened to be coming for a book signing, was also the same day that I found out that I was pregnant. So those were pieces of this puzzle that I put together as I wrote this. So there were synchronicities and things that had happened that I didn't even notice as I was living my life, but as I went back and dissected it as a book, I found those pieces of information in my life as if I was the reader and finding something through reading a book.
That's so interesting. How did you identify those? Were you going through like diary entries, or it just became apparent as you were writing about them?
Well, I did. I went through diary entries. I also went back and looked at a calendar. I knew when I had come to Blowing Rock for a book signing. I remembered, obviously, the day that I found out I was pregnant, but it was the synthesizing that information as I wrote the book that brought it all back together. So as the writer, I mean, I think we think as the writer, if you're writing memoir, you already know that. You know that story. You lived it. You know everything that happened. And that's not necessarily true. At least it wasn't for me. I found and learned things about my life and me and how things had come together in the writing of the book.
And were some of the things that you learned about yourself in the process of doing that that you did not expect to be delving into when you started out?
Oh, number one, I don't know that I realized everything that I had been through sort of in totality. One of the most interesting things that I learned as I wrote it was how much doesn't end up in the book, how much has to get written in order to write the scenes that are in the book. So, for instance, if I was writing scenes about that had to do with my father in the span of the book, because the book very much starts on a certain date and ends on at a certain time period, but there were scenes where I brought in things that had happened as a child. But the scene that's in the book is maybe 20% of what I wrote around my dad to get to that scene. And that was a big surprise, was how much was there to discover as I drafted and I did this process called drafting to discover how much was there that didn't end up in the final book. And it's interesting. I started the book. This will be interesting to the writer. So I started the book. I was going to write a nonfiction story of starting the farm. And that was the beginning of it. And I was in a class one time with a man, Jeffrey Davis, who's a dear mentor and friend now. And he was working in book. It was a class called Your Captivating Book. And he started telling the differences between what a memoir is versus autobiography versus nonfiction versus all the different ways that you could write a story, right? Fiction, all those things. And he said that if it's memoir versus a nonfiction story about what happened, there would be an antagonist and a protagonist. And that was the moment it became memoir. literally the moment that it went from nonfiction to memoir. And I raised my hand, and one of those moments where I was on the edge of my seat and I was sweating and I was like, I can't say this out loud. And I said, what if your antagonist is reluctant? And that was the moment it became memoir because then there was an antagonist. And from that point, I created a very clear story arc for the story on how it was going to lay itself out. I mean, obviously, there were changes as I went through, but it became something that I knew it started here. I thought it was going to start here. And I thought that this was going to be the inciting event that set me on this journey to start an alpaca farm and all these different things. And then I began to play with it from there. But that was the beginning of it being memoir versus just diary entries or story or nonfiction.
That's really interesting. I don't think I've ever heard that distinction between memoir and nonfiction. Can you describe a little bit what was going on behind the physical reaction you were having to that insight?
So, well, first of all, I don't know. You do a lot of more crime and mystery kinds of things.
That's right.
Have you ever done any memoir or self?
I have not, no.
It is super revealing. So number 1, it's super revealing. And it also, because it's memoir and it includes people that are near and dear to us, it's also very revealing about the people that are in our families, like my father. And I, instantly was like, well, I can't write what happened with my father because there's no way I could put that on the page. And there were things along the way, like I couldn't even imagine writing about the moment that I found out I was pregnant. I mean, that seems so sacred and so private and so whatever to put that out into the world. So there were things like that in terms of emotionally that I was like, well, no, 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 I can't. And everybody said that I listened to was saying, don't worry about people reading it, just write the story. I mean, you may not end up publishing it. It may just be a journey for you to go on, so just write the story. So that's kind of what I did. But along the way, I was like, oh, the thought of people reading certain parts of it was like, no, I can't do that. And then here it is. Here it is. It's out. I live in a small town. And so friends who have read it, like I've run into them at the grocery store. And so now my version of that is I'm now walking around town in my underwear because everybody's seeing everything about this period in my life, at least.
Yeah. So how did you resolve that with well, were there things you needed to resolve about the other people who feature in your book before it hit the public eye?
There were some things, most people I changed their names so that if they weren't people that are currently in my life, I changed their names. And I'm very, as a writer, I wanted it to be very much linear in the story and how it came about. I wanted people that were reading it to experience the story as I went along. And I didn't wanna change the truth, obviously. So I kept coming up against when I would have edit changes, it was like, "But that's not what happened, and I don't wanna change what happened." So it was trying to work with what happened in a way that I protected the integrity of other people or protected their privacy in ways that were and I didn't have to really change much of anything. There were things I could have gone into more depth that was just not necessary. And what's back to what I said earlier, what's interesting in writing memoir is I'm not just writing the story for the reader, I'm also telling the story of what I lived, right? So there's 80% more that's not in the book that I joke ended up on the cutting room floor that are like, it just wasn't necessary to the story. It's like it's not a main character, so we don't need to go any detail about that. So there was a lot that was written that came out in the edit process, thousands of words. And there was lots that came out in every revision before that. I'm sure that's the same with what you're writing as well. It's just different though,
Yeah.
because as a memoirist, those are pieces of the real story, right?
Well, it is interesting because I have a whole approach to writing that involves framing out the story for a multitude of reasons. I don't use the phrase outlining, but framing out the story before I really delve into the details. And I'm not sure it would be possible to translate that into memoir because I think it would be the case that it's the actual act of writing it that helps you work through it.
Exactly. That's
Yeah.
true. Very true. Very true. And yet, I also did do a framework for the story. It was very clearly on a story arc, the heroine's journey, heroine's journey. that there's the broken world and the inciting event and then the challenges and then the resolution. I mean, it very much sits on that not timeline, but that structure. And then
Well,
I was able to that helped me figure out what to write about, what not to write about as well.
yeah, I think anything that at least takes an initial whack at what are the things that I don't even need to get into at all
Right.
and save another couple of tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of words in the
Right.
process of reading the book.
But I can imagine if I was reading fiction, I could have there would be a little bit more direct route without having to
Yeah.
do as much drafting to discover.
Yeah. Yeah. Because you're not bounded by the things that actually happen. So you don't have to understand the story in the context of actual events. You just have to understand them in the context of the plausibility of the world
Right.
you're building.
Right.
So this may take us into the what did you learn that you'd like to share with your fellow readers. But of course, I have to ask about alpacas. Why alpacas and how did you work alpacas into the story of your memoir?
So alpacas are integral to the story, like very much integral. They are sort of the mentor in the story. So after finding out I was pregnant, when my son was 1, we went to the state fair and I came eye to eye with an alpaca. And literally everything disappeared. All the sounds, the smells, the fact that I had a 1-year-old in the stroller in front of me just disappeared while I had this connection with this animal. And I'd never seen an alpaca before. I didn't even know what one was. And I was spellbound in the moment and beyond, to the point that then when Will woke up in the stroller and we connected with the alpaca, I walked away from that moment saying, that's what I want to do. I want to raise alpacas. And absolutely no research about it, no information. That was what I wanted to do. And that became that piece that sometimes gets placed along our road and our journey of life. That was the next thing. And then when things changed about where we were living and there was a chance to move and do something different, that I pulled it back in and said, I want to live in the mountains. I want to raise alpacas. And we started on this journey of starting an alpaca farm. And I'm still there. I'm still here. I'm still like surrounded by alpacas on a farm in the
So
mountains of North Carolina.
what was it about the alpaca that was so compelling for you?
It was their energy. They date back to Incan times. And I think that their energy is still intact from Incan times. I mean, I'm not the only one that has that experience. I watch it happen to people all the time when they come to visit the farm. And often there's a moment that they just disappear while they connect with an alpaca. And I just stand there and wait for them to come back and carry on the conversation. And so it's interesting. It's been this whole thing. I've always been an animal lover. At the point when I met an alpaca, I'd only had a dog and a cat. I had never lived on a farm. I had never farmed. I didn't have any experience. So I set out on this journey to start an alpaca farm with like this intention, this unbelievable intention, and it all came to pass.
Do you think that there's an analogy to be made between your willingness to launch into sharing these very personal parts of your life and making the leap to decide to become an alpaca farmer without any of what would be traditional background for that goal?
Potentially, I was a writer before I met the alpaca, so I'd already done some writing. But yeah, maybe because there is a depth of living maybe and a realness to living that then lends itself to memoir writing, perhaps. Yeah.
And maybe alpacas are like the spirit animal of memoir because
Ooh, there you go.
there's
There you
this
go.
like, yeah, the background, the
Yeah.
energy, the
Yeah.
history that they bring.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and just saying the word alpaca is quite fun. So
I know. Have you ever met an alpaca before?
I don't believe I have. No,
Oh, wow. Okay. Okay.
I'll have to come down and visit you on the farm and
Yeah. Yeah, they
check.
are very, very unique and different.
Well, so much fun. Jane, thank you so much for talking to me about what you learned from
Thank you so much.
Farm Family. Yeah, this has been great. And please let people know where they can go to find out more about you and your book and everything you do online.
So the farm is Apple Hill Farm. So it's applehillfarm.com. And we are in the mountains of North Carolina. So we're in the northwest corner of North Carolina, near Virginia and Tennessee. That kind of places us in the world. The website is janeleerankin.com. And the book is Farm Family, a solo mom's memoir of finding home, happiness, and alpacas.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.